Parents send the letter down your country. So when we read the letter say, the letter asks about me, which school me go, and if me have any children, and their name and their age or anything. So when we go read the letter thoroughly, we say, this is most my mother. Our name wasn't on the letter, but the name of the business. So when we see the name of the business, I know she. The business name, yeah. So, I write her back that I may have 9 children. My big son that 21. I say the age of all of my fitness, and then name go here. And lo and behold, about 3 months after me get back one letter from her, she sent postcard. We all 9 postcards.
So I'm the one for you.
I
not say none for you.
Well, I said no. Come give me. She sent 9 postcards people to them, and in all her postcards, she put the amount of money to the age. So my son get $21 for my son, $19 for my daughter when they American now we are nurse. So she limit the money down to the last one when did a 1-year-old.
The kindness of strangers, especially of her adoptive parents, has always played a crucial role in my life. Marilyn's quest has changed her. Early insecurities have given way to a firm resolve to keep digging. One thing this has taught me is to be patient, she told me. I'm not usually good at waiting. At the same time, she does wonder if she has sometimes been too caught up in her search. I've got a job, family, friends. You can't just ignore all that and devote yourself only to this. She said that one of her first cousins, hearing the stories about her childhood, had begun to tell her about his own abandonment by his mother, my aunt, she said. Marilyn still wants to meet her birth mother. Olga, now be in her late 70s, early 80s. Recently showed up in her life by mail, then later came to Jamaica and tried to isolate her kids from her, which thankfully the daughter she approached realized. The ploy, me and Angus, we really do want to get along with our biological family and not kept away because we were born out of wedlock, and that does not fit with your high-profile title or friends, she told me. When Marilyn imagines finding her parents, she pictures herself talking to her mother. I'd still like to ask her, what was my birth like for you, she said. Other people know those things.
One of the most egregious behaviors a parent or other caregiver can do to a child is to abandon them, allowing them to suffer alone. The damages done to the child when grown are significant and should not be ignored. In this article, we shall examine together what childhood abandonment is, how it affects adults, and ways to mitigate the power it has over our lives. What is abandonment? All children are entirely dependent upon parents or caregivers for their safety in their environment. When these caretakers fail to offer support and meet the child's needs, emotionally and physically, they are said to have abandoned their child. When parents abandon their children, their kids grow up feeling unsafe in the world and feeling people cannot be trusted. These unsafe feelings lead to the child experiencing emotions where they feel they do not deserve positive attention or adequate care. For many children, abandonment is physical and may include lack of supervision, physical or sexual abuse, narcissistic abuse, the inappropriate offering of nutrition, inadequate clothes, heat, shelter, or housing. For other children, abandonment takes the form of emotional neglect and abuse when parents do not give to their children emotional conditions and environments that are necessary for their healthy development. The child is left feeling inadequate, rejected, and damaged, needing to hide themselves away from others, knowing who they are on the inside. Abandoned children are left believing it is not okay to make mistakes, that it is not okay to show their genuine emotions, that they should not have needs, and that it is not okay to be successful. Fear of abandonment in adulthood. Because they were neglected and abused as children, many adults grow up having internalized all the messages they received from their parents when they were young. Also, because they craved attention from their abusive parents, many adults grow up fearing losing the love of those they have in their lives. Fear of abandonment is not a mental illness by itself but rather a form of anxiety that can negatively affect those who experience it. Adults experiencing abandonment issues often experience problems in their relationships because they fear the other person will leave them. It is vital to recognize the signs of abandonment issues so that these issues may be tackled head-on. They include: they fear giving too much in a relationship. They push people away to avoid rejection. They are often people pleasers. They experience codependency. They feel insecure in intimate relationships and friendships. They require repeated reassurances that they are loved. They feel the need to control others. They jump from one relationship to another. They often will sabotage their relationships. Other symptoms that may challenge a survivor of abandonment's life include the following: constant worry, panic or anxiety, fear of being alone, isolation, frequent physical illnesses, low self-esteem, addiction, disordered eating, self-harm. Knowing the signs and symptoms can help you fight abandonment issues. The long-term effects of abandonment and neglect. People who have experienced abandonment might be more likely to have long-term mental health disorders, often based on the fear the abandonment will happen again in their adult relationships. Mood swings and anger issues later in life can often be traced to abandonment in infancy due to the lack of emotional and other support from parents. Some of the mental health conditions thought to be heavily influenced by abandonment include anxiety, depression, codependency, attachment anxiety, borderline personality disorder. For someone who lacks self-esteem due to childhood abandonment, the fear of being abandoned again becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy as their clinginess and other negative behaviors tend to push away potential life partners and friends. Other long-term consequences affect future generations of those who experienced abandonment as a child. A recent study, published in Biological Psychiatry, Cognitive Neuroscience and Neuroimaging found that the offspring of the abandoned and neglected inherit brain abnormalities from their mothers show up as functional disconnectivity between the amygdala and medial prefrontal regions of their children's brains shortly after birth. The treatments for childhood abandonment in adults. The treatment of abandonment issues focuses mainly on establishing healthy emotional boundaries and building a plethora of new responses when old thought patterns of fear begin to emerge or re-emerge. There are two primary treatments for abandonment that work tightly together to treat abandonment and neglect issues, including the following. Psychotherapy. While psychotherapy is not for everyone, seeking out a mental health professional's help can help those who were the victims of childhood abandonment and neglect. They can learn to overcome their fears of being abandoned again. Therapists work with their clients to understand where the fear originates and how it affects their relationships. Self-care. Self-care includes making sure the survivor healthily meets their emotional needs by forming friendships and relationships and allowing themselves to trust. Should you love someone who has abandonment issues, there are ways you can support them while they heal. Validate their fears. This means that you should acknowledge their feelings of abandonment without judgment. This move is vital to maintaining open communication. Validating a loved one's fears doesn't mean agreeing with them, but instead, supporting their feelings to further build on trust and compassion. You can do this by following the 6-level approach mentioned in Psychology Today. 1. Be present and actively listen to their concerns. 2. Reflect and summarize your loved one's feelings verbally and without judgment. 3. Become a mind reader, and by listening to what they say help them identify their emotions. 4. Understand their history so you can openly state that you understand when circumstances trigger their past history of abandonment. 5. Normalize their fears by acknowledging the fact that others with their history have fears of abandonment and that their feelings are understandable. 6. Use radical genuineness to deeply validate your loved one and share your loved one's fears as your own. The treatment of abandonment anxiety can be very successful, but it requires commitment and self-care. Many people with abandonment issues do not see how destructive their behaviors have been to their relationships until it is pointed out to them and they begin to heal. However, Treatment can teach new ways of thinking and coping to end the overarching and debilitating power of abandonment in childhood. Home, Child Protection, Child Abandonment and the Law. Child Abandonment and the Law. By Angela Arms, updated, the 5th of October, 2023. Comments * discuss. Child abandonment social. As much as we as parents would like to convince ourselves that such a problem does not exist, the problem of child abandonment is one that is all too real. For some, the stress and responsibility of being a parent is just too much, and under great emotional stress and turmoil a parent struggling to cope may leave their children unattended. For others, the responsibility of being a parent especially at a young age is too much and the desire to recapture their own lost youth results in a mother or father leaving their child or children alone. The law and child abandonment. Child abandonment is considered to be the act of leaving of a child on their own without any intention of returning to ensure their safety and well-being. It is considered to be among the most serious of offenses a parent can commit in relation to their child. Child abandonment is normally discovered if a child or children are left alone for a long period of time and are observed to be behaving in a manner not normally befitting of their behavior. This may include the children wandering around the area in which they live at peculiar times, asking others as to the whereabouts of their parent or children misbehaving or causing trouble in order to seek attention. What happens if a child is found to be abandoned? If a child has been abandoned, the law must step in at once in order to secure their safety. The likeliest course of action is for social services to be called in. They will attempt to contact another family member into whose care the child will be placed. This is deemed a temporary measure initially, but in the cases of child abandonment that have documented, this can become a long-term arrangement, especially if the parent does not return or shows no signs of being able to cope. In the absence of any other family, the child will be placed in foster care until a family member can be located or until the courts, in conjunction with social services, make a decision as to what course of action should be taken. What is the penalty for child abandonment? The penalty for child abandonment is usually a custodial sentence, especially if it is proven beyond any doubt that the parent responsible was of sound mind at the time of the abandonment. Social services, along with the police and local authority, will normally try to establish if there have been any mitigating circumstances that have led up to the offense occurring, such as a bereavement, signs of emotional distress or the breakup of a marriage or relationship. If there are signs of such emotional distress, the parent will be required to undergo counseling and also may be instructed to participate in parenting classes while their child is looked after in foster care. With all parties discussing the circumstances surrounding such abandonment, the parent may be reunited with their children, but may be supervised for a set period of time by social services and welfare officers until it is deemed appropriate to allow them to care for their children unsupervised. Child abuse. There are several forms of cruelty to children, but the most common and indeed the most difficult to understand is child abuse, either physical or emotional. Child abuse is commonly thought of as having unlawful sexual relations or contact with a child. This is a deeply disturbing event for the sufferer, in many cases destroying their lives and leaving them feeling vulnerable and unable to maintain relationships with others around them. Signs of child sex abuse. Common telltale signs that a child may be suffering from abuse are: withdrawn behavior, refusal to communicate, refusing to spend time in the company of adults, being afraid of a particular adult, truancy, displaying aggressive behavior, being overly familiar with the use of sexual terms and slang. Of course, sexual abuse is not the only form of cruelty that can be inflicted upon a child. There are other forms just as unpleasant and uncalled for. They include neglect, domestic violence, physical abuse, emotional abuse. Neglect. Neglect is not looking after a child's welfare to the best of an adult's ability. It can manifest itself as a child looking dirty or perhaps unwashed, and often they are left alone for long periods of time to look after themselves. A child suffering the effects of neglect may also appear to be hungry all the time or have lost an unusual amount of weight in a short period of time. Domestic violence. It is common for children living in a home where domestic violence is prominent to be the victims of such violence, too. Often when an individual is drunk or highly strung. He or she may lash out at anyone around them, and this can sometimes include the children. It is commonplace for children to try to diffuse volatile situations between warring parents, the results of which can include bodily harm such as smacking, punching or severe bruising. Physical abuse. Physical abuse is different from sexual abuse, and can be best described as beating a child for reasons that are perhaps nothing more than trivial annoyances. Some parents, especially those under great deals of stress, can lash out at their children in moments of blind fury and can cause bruising, cuts or broken limbs as a result of their actions. Emotional abuse. This kind of abuse is one that many people might argue is hard to detect. An adult may shout at their child, refuse to cuddle them or praise them when they do something well. They even tell them that they are not loved or are unwanted, something that no individual adult or child wishes to be told. This can have a knock-on effect in that child's adult life, damaging their self-esteem and confidence and making them feel as though they are inferior or incapable of finding someone to love them. If you suspect that a child you know is the recipient of such abuses, you should first try to find out from them if there is a genuine problem. If you do find that such a problem exists, contact your local social services, the details of which you can find in any yellow pages or telephone directory. Alternatively, contacting the NSPCC, National Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Children, is also a good idea.
Please don't forget to like, share and subscribe.